What has this been like knowing that you shot the number 2 all time in the state of Illinois, second behind the world record and then number 6 all time and the biggest in the last 16 years? Like that's insane.
To be honest, I didn't realize how good it was. I had no idea it was number 2 in the state of Illinois. I had no idea it was in the top 10 all time. I had no idea there hadn't been a bigger typical kill in 16 years.
Lights,
camera,
follow the trail.
ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera.
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
Trail Cam Radio.
From the guys at Exodus.
All right, we are live here. We have Don Higgins here on the line. What do you have going on in Illinois right now, Don?
I'm building a new house. Going to occupy a lot of my time this summer. Been to Iowa. I was just in Iowa over the weekend and got to apply for a tag by the end of the week. And I'm trying to decide between 2 different units in Iowa. I've got some cameras out over there and hoping a giant would show up on one of them and help me make up my mind. But that's not happened yet. So when I finally do, I'll be going back to Iowa and spending a lot of time moving cameras this summer. I don't really have a giant, on the line like I typically do. So this is going to be an interesting season, a little bit different than the past few years.
Yeah, I bet. Is this going to be your first time applying for Iowa, the first time hunting? Have you hunted there prior?
I've never hunted in Iowa, but, I've got 4 bonus points. So I'm hoping I can draw the unit that I'm looking for, and it'll be my first time hunting in Iowa.
No, that's cool. Yeah, you should have. There's pretty good odds anywhere in the state, regardless of the unit. You got at least you have a chance,
Yeah.
So yeah, that'll be super cool to follow along and see how that plays out. The question is, what if? You're in a league totally by yourself. There's only a couple of guys in the world that are doing what you're doing. So what happens if you draw the tag, you run cameras throughout the summer, and you don't find a giant?
That's a good question.
I guess that's not an option for you, huh? You're just working until you find one.
Well, one thing about it, I'll spend enough time looking that I should be able to find one. But if I don't, I've still got plenty of options in Illinois as well. I even got a place in Indiana where I'll have cameras this summer. So probably wherever the biggest buck shows up on camera, that's where I'll spend the majority of my time. And I certainly don't want to eat that Iowa tag. But if I don't know that I'm hunting a giant, I don't have the confidence just to sit in the tree and hope one comes along.
Right.
So I'll be doing everything I can to find one.
The tough thing with Iowa, yeah, you're restricted to those zones. With Illinois, a non-resident tag, you can hunt the whole state. I'm sure that's a bit of a predicament right now, trying to figure out what zone to hunt. I actually just applied for applied for my Iowa tag literally yesterday before I flew out here. So I'm going in blind because my expectations quite probably aren't on the giant caliber, but that's still exciting nonetheless.
Yeah, I've got it narrowed down to 2 units, and I'm just hoping that I can get a picture of a giant in one of those 2 this week, and I probably won't apply until the last minute. Well, if I don't get a tag or a picture of a good one, then I pretty much know which unit I'm going to apply for. But I've got pretty high hopes for the other unit as well, and put out a bunch of cameras in that unit. So I just did that on Friday and Saturday of last week, so they haven't been there that long. So I'm just hoping that something shows up real quick.
But you were out there last summer and spent a little bit of time too, knocking on doors or trying to gain permission or something, right?
Yeah, actually, I've been out there since 2017, and 17 is the year I shot Smokey and Trump back-to-back hunts in October. That year in November, with my tags filled, I actually went to Iowa and spent some time snooping around. But, I've been looking for a good little while out there, but I don't care where you're at. If you're in Iowa, Illinois, or wherever, those big bucks just aren't behind every tree, and
right.
You got to cover a lot of real estate to find them.
Absolutely.
Well, should we dive into some of the questions we have right here?
Yeah. Let's. That was a little off the cuff there, but yeah.
Sure. Okay. So, one question we kind of have here is, you walk a lot of farms and you've helped a lot of people make farms better. And I feel with a lot of things, there's always the lowest common denominator, like the one thing that is in common with all those parcels. And based on your experience, like what have you seen that the top tier, like the top 1% of farms, like what do all those farms have in common? Is it seclusion? Is it the size of the parcel? Is it cover? If you had to boil it down to one thing or a couple things, what typically makes a farm just like top tier?
Well, I think the layout of the property for one thing, but I tell people all the time the most important thing, whether you're buying a property or leasing or whatever, what is around that property is more important than what's on it. And what I mean by that is you could take a 10-acre property that's nothing but open ag field, not a tree on it. And if it sits right next to a 1,000-acre sanctuary where no hunting is allowed, and you put food on that 10 acres of ag field that you buy or lease, well, you can have fantastic hunting. So, and I think that's lost. A lot of people lose that idea when they're buying or leasing a farm, is they don't look beyond the boundary. They look at what's there and don't consider what's around the property. So that's a big one. I think there's probably more properties ruined by too much hunting pressure than anything. That's something very common that I see from one client to the next is a lot of people, deer hunting is different to different people. And for a guy like me, it's almost a solitary thing. I'm kind of a loner anyway, and it doesn't bother me one bit to spend a week alone sitting in a tree, where other people, they want to have friends around when they go to camp at night. And sometimes they even got to have them in the tree with them. And it's very common to see a property with way too many hunters on it. And too many hunters means there's not going to be mature bucks to any degree anyway. So those are a couple of big ones.
No, you said something there about, not paying attention to or not fully understanding of what's around that property. And just from, I guess, a listener perspective, I've tuned into the Chasing Giants podcast and listened to you and Terry. You guys do a great job. But there was a specific episode where you were referencing like a hub and a spoke of a wheel. Could you, I guess, go through that that analogy of your property being a hub and the spokes going to other hubs and whatnot? Could you go back over that for our listeners?
Yeah, and I don't recall the specific episode you're talking about, but you want your property to be the prime property in an area. So it's the hub. It's where the deer on surrounding properties come to your property at some point. It's part of their travel. A lot of that is security. If you've got the most secure property in an area, the deer are really going to focus in on that, and that's where they're going to go when the pressure's on. Food will really help hold them there, especially food in the late season. And I think a lot of guys manage their farm for hunting season. And I take a different approach. I manage my property for the entire year. I don't ever want a deer to have to leave for food. It doesn't matter what month it is. I want food there for them, quality food. And I want security cover there, every day of the year as well. And when other, landowners around me are putting pressure on their property, or they don't have food on their property, well, guess what? The deer are coming to my place. So my place kind of becomes the hub, the central, activity center, if you will, for the deer in my neighborhood.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yep. Totally makes sense. So I guess if a land buyer, a leaser, and I guess anyone looking to get into their own private parcel, whether it's purchasing or leasing, taking that approach is probably, like you said, it's, I guess in reality, that's one of the most important thing is making sure that you're kind of better or the best in every aspect around whitetail habitat, hunting pressure, food, cover, all those things, kind of full spectrum in that deer neighborhood.
Right. I mean, I tell my clients all the time to think of your property as one square on a giant checkerboard.
Mm-hmm.
You're surrounded by other properties, and you got to make your square the best square on the checkerboard. And to make it the best, you got to make it different. You got to offer things that nobody else on the checkerboard's offering, and that can be different food sources. It can be a degree of security that they can't find anywhere else. It can be a type of cover. For example, maybe nobody else in your neighborhood has switchgrass fields. If you've got a large switchgrass patch on your property, well, you're probably going to have some bucks bedding in it.
Right.
So anything you can do to make your place different and better.
Yeah, a little more diverse. One quick question on, you're talking about hunting pressure and sanctuaries. What's your thought? I guess let me frame it up this way. There's two total different ends of the spectrum around sanctuaries and hunting bedding areas, right? There's guys that have parcels that, they block off X amount of acres. That's their sanctuary. It is a cardinal sin to ever step foot in that area of their property unless they're retrieving a deer. But then you have other guys that, that's their whole strategy, is to hunt bedding areas. Where do you fall in line with like either one of those thoughts or strategies, ideologies?
Well, I think I fall right in the middle because I like to hunt bedding areas, but I'm hunting right on the edge of them. I've got sanctuary or a sanctuary on my property. The whole heart of my property is a sanctuary, and I stay totally out of it. I give it to the deer, but I'm hunting the edges all the way around it with my scent always blowing out. So I'm kind of somewhere in between, I guess.
Okay. No, it makes sense. I guess moving on here. I guess we'll stay on the habitat side. Like, what's one thing, like looking back at, your farm, things that you've done previously throughout the years, what's one thing you look back and just cringe that, you put yourself through, put your property through? What's one thing you would do over?
Wow, that's a tough one.
Chad stole that question from me. I wrote that down. He jumped right to it.
Well, I guess it's probably my hunting approach. Whenever I started, I didn't realize the importance of security in a sanctuary. And I think that's pretty common with deer hunters. Everybody gets hung up on food plots. Got to plant a food plot, and got to plant the right thing in that food plot. That's what's going to make me successful, having a food plot and what I plant in it. And that's not the case at all. Security is hands down the most important thing on a property. Once I figured that out, my success just skyrocketed. And I planted some things, basically some CRP seed mixes and such that I thought would be better cover than they were. And I'm actually in the process now of converting some of those over to some better grasses that are taller and stand better. Mm-hmm. My property is a work in progress. It's never done, I don't think. At one point, I thought I would soon be done and I could just sit back and relax the rest of my days and never have any projects to do. But I discovered that's never going to happen. There's always going to be something to do to make it just a little bit better, because I'll sit in my tree stands and I'll just observe and I'll think, if I just did this, it'd be just a little bit better. And I'll take notes. So then come off season, I've got a whole list of notes of things to do on my property. So I think it's a never ending process.
Let me ask you this. When I listen about your farm, I can never picture what it looked like. And obviously I'm not asking you to, any Google Earth creepers can figure it out based on this answer. But like, how did you buy that parcel in terms of, did you buy it as one piece? Was it listed? What did it look like when you bought it? And then kind of like, what were some of the transformations you made over the years that you've owned it?
Well, actually, the farm where I live was my grandparents' farm. The house that I live in, my mom was born in that house. And so I've been here since the day I was born, basically. I grew up about 3 miles away, but I spent a lot of time as a kid on this property. And when my grandparents passed away, I purchased it. And I've made, 2 other purchases of ground that butts up to their original. Originally, they only had 30 acres. It was a real small farm. Mm-hmm. And I bought 2 other tracts to give me 120 acres today. But it just kind of fell into my lap. And the crazy thing is when I started about 30 years ago, there was hardly any deer here. I mean, if I seen a deer track on this farm, it was newsworthy. I started planting trees and creating cover. And I just dreamed that if I could sit in a tree stand and maybe see 4 or 5 deer on a hunt, that'd just be awesome one day on my own property. Reality is totally blown away that dream. I mean, I've sit in my stand and seen up to over 70 deer actually in one hunt, over 17 antlered bucks, or 17 antlered bucks, not over 17, but 17 antlered bucks on one hunt. So, you know, it lays out beautiful, but at the time when I first bought it and started working on it, I thought it was a terrible place. I mean, I just, it's not surrounded by any woods. It's surrounded by open ag fields. And I thought, here I am with just this property with no woods around. How am I ever going to get deer to stay here? And the beauty of it today is that with no woods around me, I don't have people sitting my property line. And it's kind of an oasis, a deer oasis in a sea of ag. And, you know, I can let bucks go, and sometimes they live, sometimes they don't, but I think I can probably let them go and have a better expectation of them surviving than a lot of other land managers. So, you know, there was no method to the madness. It just kind of fell into my lap.
What's the mix of cover versus food percentage on that 120 acres? Is it like an 80-20, you know, 80% cover, 20% food, or what does that mix look like on your farm?
No, I've got a 25 acre ag field, so you can take that right out of the mix, and that leaves less than 100 acres. Of what's left, the 95 acres that's left, probably only about 10 acres of that is food. A beauty of the property that, again, I had no idea, it just fell in my lap, was those ag fields that surround me take a lot of the browse pressure off of my plots.
Mm-hmm.
So I can probably get away with planting fewer acres of food plots than a lot of land managers, just because right across the property line, pretty much all the way around me are ag fields that the deer in the evening time, they can walk, you know, into the neighbor's ag field and start feeding. And my plots are basically to get them through the winter.
Got it. So really, roughly out of the 100, you have 10 acres of food plots that you plant, and then obviously, like you said, the neighboring farms are doing a lot of the heavy feeding throughout the year. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. So I guess with it, let's say 90% of it being cover, what's the mix of that? Obviously, some of the more sturdy grasses like you were talking about, but how does your farm have so much staying power?
Well, it's diversity. I've probably got 35 acres of tall grasses, broken down into 3 different fields, and the rest is wooded cover. I mean, yeah, I've got, you know, pine and spruce thickets. I got oak flats. I got just a mixture of briar patches and odds and ends saplings growing up. See, basically when I bought it, it was a cattle pasture. It was kind of gently rolling, has a small creek that goes through it. Along that creek, there were some giant bur oak trees, but there was no ground cover. The cattle that had been there for years, and I actually had cattle at one point on the farm, and they just, you know, kept the woody vegetation down. It was just nothing but grasses. And I got rid of the cattle about 30 years ago and converted those old pastures into various types of cover, and it just keeps getting better.
So let me ask you this: if you had to start all over again, would you want to start with an abandoned cattle pasture again, or I guess what are some of the key? It sounds like listening. It has like the mix of everything. It has a creek running through it. It has the oak flats, and you know, obviously you've added a lot of diversity too. But if someone wanted to kind of like duplicate what you've done, do you think having a quote unquote blank canvas is very important, or do you think you can overcome some of those items?
Well, if I was going to do it again and I was younger, I would definitely look at the cattle pasture. It just, there's a lot of things that come with that cattle pasture. Usually, especially in our area of the Midwest, if ground is flat, it's probably being farmed. So cattle pastures are usually gently rolling. A lot of times they'll have a creek through them. A lot of times they'll have a few scattered big trees for shade for the cattle. And it doesn't get them cattle off of there, and you really don't even have to do anything to have deer habitat. Just get them cattle off there and let Mother Nature take its course. And, you know, it won't be long before weeds and briars and saplings are growing up. And I think the best deer cover there is, bar none, is a growed up cattle pasture, to the point where it's not growed up to the point where there's no grass. When you've got a cattle pasture that's got a lot of saplings in it, briars and weeds and such, but there's still, when you look on the ground, there you can still see some grass. And what I found is that the bucks really love to bed in those grassy areas versus like a mature woods where there's nothing but leaves on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
They really like that regeneration where there's still some grass on the ground. It needs to be thick, don't get me wrong. It's not open grassy areas, but as that regeneration is taking place and the grasses have not yet totally given way to the woody cover, that is absolutely the best deer cover you can find.
Makes me feel good. I hunt a lot of those. The last 2 leases I got heard exactly that. So, no, that's interesting. Let me ask you this though. Okay, what about a blank canvas of a farm that's been completely clear cut? Someone went in there with a chainsaw and chopped down every tree, and we'll add some more information. It's south facing, and there's only like, I don't know, let's say 10% of trees still standing. Every marketable tree was chopped out of it. Pretty good elevation changes, and it's all south facing, butts up to big ag. Is that something that would entice you, or would it be something like, well, it's, you know, the payoff's going to be way too long before to get back to where it needs to be?
No, that'll be fantastic cover, and it won't take long. You get that sunlight in there, and the woody vegetation is just going to come on in a hurry.
How would you kind of obviously, would you want to pocket some things out to like help define the deer movement? Because if, like, quite literally, if the whole thing was chopped up and basically all of it's going to grow back super thick, would you still just have a couple areas of interest, or like, what would you do in that scenario?
Well, I mean, it varies by the property. It's hard to imagine what you're trying to describe as far as, I mean, I can envision a south-facing slope that's been clear cut, but how it lays out in relation to what's around it, I like big cover. I think that's a huge mistake that a lot of land managers make, is they make their sanctuary too small. And, you know, on my 120 acres, you can just about figure that, and we're looking at 95 acres once you take out the 25 ag field. So my 95 acres, you know, I got 10 acres of food, which leaves about 85 acres, and I got another, say, 10 that comes out from my house. I got a house and barn and a small pasture that's about 10 acres, give or take. So, you know, we're down to about 75 acres or so. And of that 75 acres, it's essentially 100% sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
Every stand on my property, if you come to my property, every stand is within 10 yards of the edge. And I always hunt it with the scent blowing out across an open ag field. And it's easy to access across the open ag fields. It doesn't get any simpler. You know, it's much easier to hunt than an area that's heavily wooded. I'll be the first to admit that, but you know, a lot of people still will put way too much pressure on other properties just like this.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of, and I speak on behalf of, on the Exodus side, of probably trying to overcomplicate sometimes, overcomplicate things at times. But do you think that's just part of the success of, obviously, on your home farm there, with just having the ability to access it in multiple ways and being able to hunt the edge consistently without educating your herd?
Yeah, and to be honest, it's something that builds over time. I try to stress this with my consulting clients. I'll lay out a custom plan for each property, and I often tell them to be thinking 5 years in advance. Don't expect next season you're going to do all these things and it's instantly going to get better. You know, for example, on my piece, the deer, when I started, if I would jump a deer, it would take off and just, you know, it'd leave the property. It'd take off across the open ag fields, and it would run to the next woods, which may be a mile away across the ag field. Well, today when I jump a deer, a lot of times they won't leave the property. They'll just run to the other side of the property. They don't want to leave because they feel so secure. And it's taken years and decades, really, and generations of deer. It's almost like it's ingrained in them anymore. And I even think the deer, this is going to sound really crazy, but I really believe the deer on my place know my smell versus someone else's smell. And the reason I say that is if there's been many times when I've sit in a tree stand and my scent's blowing out in the ag field, and here comes some deer, and they just happen to be out in the ag field, and get downwind of me, and the way they react is often just they may flare. They don't blow and just run across the country like they did 30 years ago. They'll maybe flare their tail, stick their nose in the air, and trot back into the woods. Or sometimes they even just I know they smell me, but they don't even run the other way. It's just like it's almost like they're thinking, oh, there's Don again. I just pass on by and give him a little bit of distance and I'll be fine. And the reason that I think this is because when I'm sitting in a tree with a cameraman and a deer gets downwind of us, it's totally different. The deer just go berserk. They'll start blowing and snorting and carrying on like they do on any other property. But if I'm by myself, the reaction is just totally different. And I believe the deer on this farm over decades, one generation to the next, have come to accept me almost as part of the landscape and not really a threat to them.
Well, I don't think that thought or concept is, that far out there. I've heard guys, no one specific's coming to mind right now, but I've heard guys, talk about, doing things that are repetitive to making deer accustomed to your process, whether that's the way you check cameras, like you use an ATV every single time, or use a bicycle every single time, or use a tractor every single time, or use the same gate every single time. But I've heard guys talk about doing things the same way, checking trail cameras with the wind blowing the same way, and hoping, I guess they're hoping, because there's no hard evidence, from their success that it actually works, but their thought is if they do things the same way, then deer will get used to that or accustomed to, their process and ultimately their scent, and whether it's, in their core area or not. So it's something that's probably hard to like wrap your hand around and say it's tangible, but I don't think that thought or ideology is that far out in left field at all.
Yeah, and I can tell you for absolute certain that if a deer can hear you coming on, some piece of equipment, and he has time to decide how he's going to react before you get there, whether he's going to just lay his head down on the ground and let you pass, or he's going to sneak away or whatever, or see how close you get and then blow out of there. If they can hear you coming and they have time to think about it and react, it's not near as much pressure on them as, you're walking and you slip up on them and they don't hear you coming, and there you are, 15 yards from where he's bedded, and then he finally detects you.
Right.
That's a whole different level of stress than them hearing you coming on an ATV or tractor or whatever.
Right. No, it makes sense. Makes total sense. There's something that we've just done some content around, and that's like running cameras through the summer months. And there's there's a lot of guys out there that say, don't run cameras in the summer. It's a pain in the butt. You have to worry about bugs and worry about, if you're running cameras in creek crossings or river bottoms, you have to worry about, flood events. And, the information there may not be as tangible as the information that you're getting in the fall. And we've spoke on both sides of this. We've never taken on really a concrete stance. We've talked about, we just talked about the benefits of running trail cameras through the summer and why it's important to get them out in June. But then we've also done stuff about, annual data, annual trail camera data, and making sure that information come fall or during the fall is used properly, and how much more important it is, to have your camera game on point through the hunting season. So September, October, November, December, January, those being the critical months. But I know that, you're running cameras 24/7 all year, and you are very particular with, what you're doing and all your trail camera setups and how you analyze the data. So when it comes to running cameras during the summer, like what kind of information are you looking at that you think is tangible to actually use come November?
Well, my thing is I'm trying to learn about as many bucks as possible because I'm looking for the biggest of the big, and that's just such a rare animal. I'm covering multiple states, multiple counties around my home with probably around 50 cameras now, maybe 60, and I've got to find that buck now. When I find one of them giants in the summer, I can pretty much know that his fall range is within 2 miles of where he's summer.
Mm-hmm.
If he's a mature buck, that pretty, at least in this type of ag country where I'm at, that seems to be pretty much the rule. But one thing that you can utilize, some of that summer information that you can utilize is, and I've talked about this a lot, is the article that I wrote in 2003 titled "Same Time, Same Place." No, let me back up. It was an article that I wrote, I think it was in 2015, a different article, titled "Homecoming Bucks." And what I noticed is that very early in the rut, usually around November 6th, 7th, or 8th, I mean, you can mark it on the counter, them 3 days, 6th, 7th, and 8th. A lot of bucks will shift their range from a summer range to a fall range.
Right.
So that buck goes to his fall range and the rut starts to heat up. If he cannot find a doe, and I've got multiple pictures to prove this with many different mature bucks. If he's in his fall range and he can't find a hot doe really early in the rut before things really heat up, those 3 days, November 6th, 7th, and 8th, a lot of times he will run back to his summer range for a day or so. And I have no doubt what he's doing is it's an area he's familiar with. He's not just wandering someplace where he's never been before. He's coming back to an area he's very familiar with, and he's trying to find a hot doe. A lot of times these homecoming trips will happen at night, and the buck is never even there in daylight. He runs back and sun goes down. He makes that journey a mile, 2 miles, whatever, to where he summered. He can't find a hot doe there either, so he's back. And he does the same thing at the tail end of the rut. I mean, the last few days of November. And I'm not saying all mature bucks do it because they certainly don't, but I've seen it with enough different bucks to absolutely know for certain what's going on because, those bucks, when they come back, you don't get their picture at all from the 8th to about Thanksgiving. They're gone. You don't get a single picture. And they'll come back for just a very, very brief period, 6th, 7th, and 8th, or Thanksgiving and after. And that's information that, you gather in the summer. And if a lot of times those summer bucks, the bachelor group breaks up and the bucks move off. And I've seen countless magazine articles, I don't know, hundreds of them, where somebody says, yeah, the food sources changed. And that's why the bucks, the bachelor group's breaking up, food sources changed and he moved off. Well, that's not what happened at all. It's just natural for these bucks to have a separate fall range and a summer range. And about the time that they shed velvet is when they start shifting to those fall ranges. And the other thing that I've seen is when they make that shift from the summer range to the fall range, you can mark that date on the calendar. And he's going to be there within 24 hours either side of that day. So if he shows, I mean, I've got bucks that'll show up on my property and I know what day they're coming.
Right.
They summered elsewhere, but they spend their fall here. And I know when I'm getting that first picture. And it's within 24, 48 hours either side of a certain day, year after year after year. So it's not a shift because of food sources changing. It's not a shift because usually it's not a shift because someone's put too much pressure on that summer, feeding pattern or whatever, where they were summering at. Mm-hmm. It's just a natural shift that happens as those bucks disperse into their fall breeding range.
Yeah, totally.
I had that exact thing happen this past season, actually. You released a video on YouTube, actually, like around the 3rd or 4th, and there was a buck that I had intentions of shooting, and a situation where he was gone for a while, and I watched that video, and I decided to go hunt there that morning, and sure enough, he came strolling in, and unfortunately, I put the shot just a little bit too low, and he ended up getting killed by the neighbors later, but that was like to the T. I shot him right where I had him on camera in a bachelor group in July, and like he was in that same exact spot doing the same exact thing, looking for a doe.
Mhm.
And it was November 6th. So it's like, to me, that was proof in the pudding. And the reason I went there was because I was watching a video and it was like, I don't know where to go. This deer's been MIA. It's November 6th. I have to go somewhere. And that's the video tipped me off to go there. And that's exactly what happened to a T.
Most of the time, all the time, if I'm throwing out information, I've got experience to back it up. I'm not just making something up and, it's a theory. And when I say this, I don't know how many mature bucks coming back to their summer range November 6th, 7th, and 8th. And that's it. I mean, it doesn't happen on the 9th and it doesn't happen on the 5th. You can mark it down to 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And there's more booners killed on November 7th. Yep. The middle of those 3 days, November 7th, more booners are killed on that date than any other date. And the reason for it is, the bucks have worked up to a fever pitch, and the does, in a lot of cases, the does just aren't quite there yet. But by the 9th, there's a hot doe somewhere, and a mature buck, a dominant buck, he's going to be on her. And so it's a brief window, a very brief window, but you can take that summer information that you get with those bachelor groups and velvet bucks and file it in the back of your mind, because November 6th, 7th, and 8th, if you want a chance at that buck, it's not all lost. That's when you need to be back where he was summering.
Mm-hmm. That's super, super insightful information, like super specific and super insightful. I have another question about summertime dates. And, I've heard Mark Jury talk about a specific date in August when we talked about that shift. And typically, I've seen it happen on 2 specific mature deer over the last, I want to say 3 years. Maybe it's been 2 years, where the deer will show up the same day at the end of the summer for 2 years running. There's two separate mature bucks in the same type of habitat, but that has happened on August 19th, plus or minus a day. But Mark Jury talks about that last card pull, kind of prior to hunting season, making sure that it's after August 18th. And, he's been pretty vocal about that. Have you seen the same kind of dynamic with the way bucks are shifting around or starting to move into that, breaking up, I guess, moving into that shift?
No, I honestly haven't. This is kind of news to me. But I'm not going to argue with Mark Drury. He shot enough big deer. I need to listen when he speaks. So I'll definitely be paying attention to that.
Okay. Yeah, it was just an interesting thought that he had talked about it on a couple podcasts, and, seeing that come to fruition, I was like, just a light bulb went off. And he's the only guy I've ever heard talk about that specific date of, making sure that last card pull was after August 18th. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So I wanted to get your insight on it.
Yeah, it is interesting.
So, I think we could probably make a hard transition, Jake, or is there anything?
Let me see here. Yeah, we can do that. So this is something that I've been wanting to ask. So, over the last, you have a long resume of success, but really in the last 5 years, is it that you've killed 4 of your best deer in the last 5 years? Is that right?
Actually, I've killed 4 of my best in the last 4 years. But
okay.
Close.
So
even more
corrected.
Impressive.
Okay, so you've killed 4 of your best deer in the last 4 years. What has clicked, or like, what are you doing differently? What aren't you doing anymore? Like, there has to be some sort of change there. Is it like, and I don't want to put any words in your mouth, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I was just talking about this to somebody over the weekend. I think it was West Delks, but I don't waste my time anymore. I don't go out on a hope and a prayer hoping to shoot a big deer. I prepare more than I ever have. I set the stage with each stand. Each stand is the best it can possibly be. If there's something that I could do to make that stand just a little bit better, I'd do it. And timing is everything. There's absolutely no doubt whatsoever that trail cameras have taken my game to a level that I didn't even know was possible. And there's a lot of big bucks that I've shot in recent years that I probably would never have killed without trail cameras. So they're an absolute game changer. To be honest, when you watch a buck grow up for 5 or 6 years and then decide to hunt him, it's actually fairly easy because you got so much history. You can't have 5 or 6 years of history with a 3-year-old. But by the time they get mature, if you've been watching them a while, you're locked in to the point where you know what he's going to do before he does it. You're there waiting on him to do it. And it's really all come together in the last 5 years. And, today the biggest challenge I face is getting access to the bucks I want to kill. I may discover where there's a big buck, but I can't get permission to hunt anywhere within his range or the property I need to. And I almost feel like there's not a buck out there I can't kill if I can get on the property I need to. Now, if there's somebody else hunting there and screwing things up, that's a different story too. But if I can get on the property I need to without people screwing it up, I feel like I can kill just about any buck alive today. And I don't want that to sound arrogant or like, I'm a bragging or anything like that. It's just that, like I said, years and years of trail camera history, putting it all together, when it comes time to finally go after a buck, it should be fairly easy.
So what are those things that you're looking at from those years of card pulls and years of photos? Is it simply daytime movement? Is it a specific, trail that he's using, a specific pattern? Like what are the things that you're drawing out of that trail camera information?
Well, I want to know specifically where he's at and when he's there. And I don't mean specifically as in time of day, but I mean time of season. So the first week of October, I know this is where he's going to be. Come the rut, this is where he's going to be. Come the late season, this is where he's going to be. I can have my stands all prepared before he ever gets there, and I can totally stay away and let the deer be on that property or in that area be totally relaxed until he shows up. And then when he shows up, I show up, and the deer there are moving, without being pressured. Mm-hmm. And he'll do the same. So, I mean, to be honest, I hunt less as far as just sitting in a tree. I hunt less today than I ever have in my life, but I'm having the best success ever. And again, it really boils down to the trail camera.
Mm-hmm. So, when you're going in and I guess hanging those stands and doing any types of improvements, are you hanging them relatively close to some of your camera locations?
Sometimes it just depends on the property and the situation.
Right.
I prefer to keep my trail cameras, out on. I don't even care about getting a daylight picture. I just as soon have my trail camera on a property out on an edge, a field edge, where I can just drive right up to it on a 4-wheeler and change that card and not be putting any pressure on the property at all. All I want to know is that the deer's there. If he's there, I know where to hunt him and where my stand needs to be and things like that. I'm more interested in knowing when he's at a certain location.
Got it. And I guess, being in, big ag ground with, outside of your personal farm, but being in big ag ground with probably limited timber and limited cover, is it a fair assumption to say that it's a little easier to draw those conclusions of where those deer are going to be during daylight hours?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that open ag country it can be some of the most frustrating because you can sit there and not see very many deer and a lot of deerless hunts, versus some areas that are a good mix of timber and ag. But you can really pin down those mature bucks that are living in farm country.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I know just from, I've only hunted Illinois one season, but we had a decent chunk of ground there, most of it tillable. But it seemed like while we were there hunting, you were either in it or you were just totally out of the game. And it just felt like there were different pockets or different little sections of timber and creek bottoms that, would be hot for a couple of days, and then boom, it would dry up, and then it was hot somewhere else. And we saw that not only from trail cameras, but also from stand sightings as well.
Well, a lot of my success is also, I know what kind of property to look for. When I'm going to looking in a new area, like I'm looking in Iowa now, I want a place everybody else is overlooking. I want zero competition from other bow hunters, mm-hmm. because it takes so little pressure to just totally change a mature buck's habits that I don't want to take a chance that, I've sit here and I've waited for, till who knows, maybe early November to go in and hunt a spot. I don't want to take a chance that some other bow hunter was in there in October and screwed it all up. So I'm looking for places everybody else is ignoring, because I guarantee you a mature buck's doing the same thing.
Right. Yep. I've heard a lot of guys talk about, hunting some of the plain states through, the western Midwest, I guess, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and making note of what they would consider like junk parcels or overlooked parcels, things that, that only had like fallow fields or CRP and just maybe a couple draws with no standing timber, that those areas, maybe I shouldn't even be saying this on on the podcast, but those are areas they like to focus on just locating deer, because it seemed like the 2 and 3 year olds were sticking to the creek bottoms and where there was timber. And then the older deer were finding those parcels where there was, no pressure. Obviously, there's more guys hunting those creek bottoms with timber than those open draws and grasslands and fallow fields.
Human intrusion's everything. I say it on the podcast probably twice a week, but human intrusion ruins a lot of good properties.
Yeah.
So, I try to avoid human intrusion as much as the deer do. If a property's got too much human pressure, I'm looking elsewhere.
What about summer projects? Like, where do you draw the line? Or is it?
Anything in the cover. I don't go in the cover in the woods and do any summer projects. The food plots and basically running trail cameras has become one of my favorite things to do. And I usually put my cameras out about the 1st of July. Now, this year I went to, Iowa early to get some out because I'm trying to determine which unit I want to draw a tag for and where I want to spend my time. But around home, I typically don't put my cameras out till about the 1st of July. And I look forward to the 1st of July as much as I do the 1st of October when season opens. So that's my big summer project, is from July on is looking for those velvet giants, whether it's be a trail camera or through trail cameras or, glassing in the evenings.
Yeah, that's I'm looking forward to July as well. But let's talk a little bit. I feel like it'd be weird if we didn't talk about recent news with your buck there with Mel. How has this been? Because it seems like we just watched your video, the video with Mel, and this even keel is the best way I can describe like your demeanor. Obviously thankful, but what has this been like knowing that you shot the number 2 all time in the state of Illinois? Second behind the world record, and then number 6 all time, and the biggest in the last 16 years. Like that's insane.
To be honest, I had a lot of friends that were pushing me to get that deer scored because of his net typical score.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew he was not going to hit 200 net typical. I had him at about 196. And I got so busy over the winter with the consulting visits and that I just kind of put it on the back burner and didn't think too much of it. Finally I got caught up a little bit and contacted Tim Walmsley, who's a friend of mine, known for a long time, who's an official measure for Boone and Crockett and Pope and Young. And he's measured a lot of the biggest deer that's ever been killed, like the Brewster buck, and very well respected measure by anybody that knows anything about those 2 clubs. So anyway, I got with him and he measured it and had friend Jim Barry was there too, who's also an official measure, and those guys came up with a score of 197 and 3/8, and I'm thinking, well, that's good. It's not 200 inches. It's good. Well, I didn't realize how good it was. I had no idea it was number 2 in the state of Illinois. I had no idea it was in the top 10 all time. I had no idea there hadn't been a bigger typical killed in 16 years. I don't know, anymore, the score of a buck. I love it when they score over 200 inches. No, I won't lie about that, but I don't know. I can't even really put it into words. It's not something that I really hang my hat on. I'm blessed that it happened. I'm proud that it happened. But would I have been any better hunter if he'd only scored 180 inches? I don't think so. It's just, it is what it is. I'm extremely blessed to have had the opportunity to shoot that deer, but I don't get all that wrapped up in scores.
Yeah, I just couldn't imagine. Yeah, I just couldn't imagine. So it was basically a lot of those accolades were somewhat to a surprise then, from the sounds of it.
They actually all were. I mean, I expected him to, maybe top 5 in the state of Illinois or something like that. I had no idea he was going to be number 2. And yeah, it was a surprise for sure.
I mean, the whole story behind that buck, you watching him, as a yearling and then as a 2-year-old, and naming him Mel. I mean, right from the start, you knew he was going to be something special.
Yeah, when he grew his second rack as a 2-year-old, and it was a 6x6, clean 6x6 typical that was probably 160 inches. That's when I knew that he had the chance to really be something, because you just don't see 2-year-old 6x6s scoring 160 inches.
Right. That's
and I know there's a lot of people that don't believe he's the age that I say he is, but I'll tell you what, I would bet everything I own on it. I seen that buck as a yearling, and I seen him in plots numerous times with other yearling bucks. I've got his shed. His shed is the antler, the base of that antler is probably smaller in diameter than my thumb. And you can actually see that on the video. That was a yearling buck. And I know there's a lot of people don't believe that was a 10-point yearling, but he was. And I mean, that's probably been the biggest naysayers just don't believe that was a 4-year-old deer, but I'm telling you it was.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but he was right at 200 or over 200 as a 3-year-old as well, correct?
Yeah, I actually found his sheds when he was 3, and passed him on video twice that year, and they scored 216. So he only gained, but he was more non-typical.
Mm-hmm.
As a 4-year-old, he cleaned up. He lost some of that non-typical stuff. He still had 2 forked tines, but he only put on a total of like 5 inches.
So we have a question written down here, and we got to ask it, but we're not asking this from any kind of we don't like not to come from an arrogant place or sound like a jerk, because I mean your resume speaks for itself, and the number of deer and the size of deer you've passed on camera it's insane. Like I said earlier in the podcast, there's so few guys in the world that are hunting at the level that you are. You're in a very small class of folks. You can probably count them on one hand. But was there ever a thought to let him walk as a 4-year-old to see what he could have been?
Even if he wasn't broken up, because we obviously as you made mention, you're headed to a radio show, and then you said if you saw him at 4 and he was clean, you were going to shoot him, and if he was broken, you're going to wait.
Yeah, I did think about it, because I didn't realize how big he was.
That's insane.
So and I seen him in velvet twice last summer, and both times they were almost a mile apart. He covered so much territory. If he would have been a homebody like Smokey was, I would have passed him.
Mm-hmm.
But he was so, he covered a lot of ground. And I know somebody that's seen him, and I know they seen him and had his picture. They even sent me the trail camera picture that they got 3 miles from my place.
Wow.
And that was in one direction, and I had a good friend describe him to a T 3 miles in the other direction. So that's 6 miles from them 2 points that I know he was covering. And I had his picture 1.5 miles in a third direction on opening morning of gun season as a 3-year-old, when he scored 216 at 8 a.m. And when I got that picture, I'm thought, there's no way this deer lives.
Mm-hmm.
Opening morning gun season, 8 o'clock, he's out walking around. Yeah. And he's 1.5 miles from my place. Those things were all a factor in me deciding to shoot him. And, I've had people ask, if you'd have let him go, you think, he might have been a world record. Well, I really doubt if he ever would have. I think the older he would have got, the more non-typical stuff he would have had. There's no way to know, and I'm not second guessing myself whatsoever. I was blessed with the opportunity to shoot him, and I did, and there's no looking back. So,
Well, so one of the interesting things that you mentioned there is not really knowing how big he actually was. Do you find it? Because we find ourselves in a similar situation. Like when you start looking at trail camera pictures of a deer of like
190, 200.
yeah, even like 180, 185, you just know it's a big deer. Do you find it pretty hard to draw conclusions around total inches when deer get that big, or are you just at the point where that's a big deer, I'm going after him? I mean, where are you at with that?
well, I knew he was over 200. But my second biggest buck is 214, and I wasn't sure he was going to beat 214. And the year before he was 216, I wasn't sure he was as big as he was the year before. But when it comes to those caliber of bucks, I can come up with a pretty decent guess. I mean, I may guess 200, he may be 210, or he may be 190, but he's right there close.
Right.
And a lot of it comes down to the individual buck and where he's at and how old he is before I decide whether I'm going to go after him or give him another year.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's we have cameras spread out all over the place, multiple states, and we can't kill any big deer, but we can certainly get pictures of big deer. And it's like the running joke in the office is that everyone's trying to throw numbers or scores at these things, and it's we find ourselves just saying it's so difficult when they get to that caliber, when they're obviously if it's a clean typical, it's a little bit easier to guesstimate or estimate. But either way, even in non-typical, big typicals, like once they get 190 inches, it's so hard to say to get close. Where I feel like when you look at a 150-inch deer, 140-inch deer, even 160-inch deer, like you can if you know what you're looking at, you can get pretty damn close.
Right.
But once they get that big, it's like you add an inch, you're an inch shy on his G2. You're an inch short in his beams, you're off on his mass a little bit, and all that stuff starts to add up. Before you know it, he's 10 inches bigger than what you thought.
Yep, I agree 100%. And, most of the time when I go after one of these bigger bucks, I got a rough idea, but it's usually within 10 inches or so. Man, it's just a guess.
Right. So, I mean, like you said, you probably would never dreamt in your lifetime the last 4 years would have played out the way they have. I think that when guys are talking about, top level deer hunters, habitat managers, consultants, you're on the top of the list. So looking back at the last 4 years, like what's next for you, Don? Like where do you go? What do you do?
Well, to be honest, I've only got one thing left on my whitetail bucket list, if you will, and that's to kill a public land booner. And it's partly for me and it's partly for the naysayers. You wouldn't believe you probably have seen some of it on social media, but guys that think that I've got a big, well-managed farm in Illinois or Iowa or wherever, and that's the only reason that I shoot these deer, and they just don't understand reality and what I started with on this farm. And it's only 120 acres, and yeah, it lays out ideal, but it didn't when I started. And I just really like to shoot a giant on public to see what the naysayers say. If I just do it one time, I'm not interested in hunting public the rest of my life and racking up a bunch of them, but I just want to kill one good one on public.
That's
and
awesome.
I know the haters are still going to be there. It ain't going to shut them up. I mean, they're going to come up with something else, but
If you don't have haters, you're not doing anything, really. It's basically what it comes down to in the world.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy that's sitting laying on the couch and in his house trailer with the door off the hinges and his grass in his yard waist high, nobody gives that guy any crap at all. He can lay there and eat potato chips and drink beer all day long and send his wife to work and never do a thing. And nobody's coming down on that guy. But as soon as you start getting successful, then you're going to hear about it.
Yep.
Oh, that's funny. I love that reference. Well, I think you got anything else, Jake? I mean, we're going on an hour here.
No, I mean, I feel like we could always. I think that's it for this. I don't want to extend it any longer. We'll have to get you on here again. I'd like to actually talk about like identifying good rec pieces in a little bit more depth. And I know we talked a little bit prior to recording about interest rates and everything else going on that might be boring for some people, but I find fascinating. And you know, obviously you've been able to piece together a really special place for deer, and I think there's a lot to be learned from there. But as far as right now, I think we're ready to close it out. Unless you have any other thing you want to add into it, Chad or Don.
I just appreciate you guys. I think you guys are the top trail camera people in the industry. You got a great product, but more importantly, you are the of all the trail camera companies I've ever dealt with, you guys are first class and at the top of the list. And I appreciate what you guys do, and I'm glad to come back on anytime.
Well, we certainly appreciate those words, Don. That's humbling to hear from yourself.
Yeah, and we'll take you up on that too. So
yeah,
just FYI.
Yeah, I hope you do.
Cool.
Yeah, we won't be shy. So,
well, perfect. We'll wrap it up there. We'll link to all your links and websites and social, so people can track you down if they haven't found you already, which I have a hard time believing. But once again, appreciate it. Until next time.